At exactly 7:15 a.m., people thought they were just seeing a little girl walking her dogs, until they realized there were 7 of them, and not one made a sound. No barking, no pulling, just silence. Then someone noticed the blood. Minutes later, a police officer followed her into a quiet street, and the dogs turned, all at once, like they already knew he was there. What happened next shattered everything, because this wasn't just a girl and her pets. It was something trained, something controlled, and something that survived a fire it was never supposed to escape. By the time the truth came out, there were 2 girls, not one, and only one of them believed in saving what was broken. The other believed in controlling it. And when they finally faced each other underground, it wasn't just a confrontation, it was a war between fear and loyalty. But the most shocking part, the girl everyone thought was gone, was only just beginning. 7:15 a.m. A cold Tuesday morning in Brooklyn. The street looked ordinary until people noticed the little girl in the red coat walking with 7 German shepherds beside her. She looked too small to be holding that many leashes, yet her hands were steady and her steps were calm. The dogs did not bark, pull, or look around like normal pets. They moved in silence, shoulder to shoulder, as if they had practiced this walk 100 times before. One of them had fresh blood staining the fur around its neck. That was the first thing that made people stop. A mother pulled her son closer. A delivery man stepped off the sidewalk. 2 women near a coffee cart turned and whispered to each other. Then Officer Daniel Brooks looked up from his patrol route and saw the girl for the first time. At that exact moment, his radio crackled with a call about an unknown body found nearby after a violent attack. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. He looked from the radio to the girl and then to the dogs. They all stopped at once, perfectly still, like they had heard something too. Then, without any command he could see, they started walking again. Months earlier, in October 2018, that same girl had been sitting outside a broken house on Cedar Avenue with a weak puppy named Rex in her arms. Her mother lay inside, alive but lost in a coma, and there was no one left to help her. Emily had already lost her father and learned how fast people looked away from pain that did not belong to them. One by one, she took in abandoned dogs others called dangerous. She fed them, cleaned their wounds, and stayed close when they shook in fear. Rex was different from the start. He watched her the way people watched storms, as if he sensed something before it happened. One night he slipped outside alone. By morning he came back with blood on his mouth, and Emily understood these dogs did not just stay near her. They answered something deeper. Now, on Maple Street, Daniel could not explain why the sight of her unsettled him more than the radio call. It was not the blood. It was the silence, the control, and the feeling that the girl was not lost. She was walking towards something, and the dogs knew. Daniel followed at a distance as Emily turned into Harrison Lane, a narrower street where the city noise seemed to fall away with every step. The morning traffic faded behind them. Even the wind felt quieter there. Then Daniel saw the first dark spots on the pavement. Fresh blood, small but clear, scattered in a trail that led in the same direction Emily was walking. His hand moved toward his radio, but he stopped when Rex, the largest of the 7, suddenly froze and turned his head. The dog's eyes locked directly onto Daniel. It was not the look of an animal surprised by being followed. It was the look of something that had known he was there all along. Daniel slowed, trying not to show tension. But that was the moment everything changed. Without Emily saying a word, the other 6 dogs shifted around her in one smooth movement and spread into a half-circle facing him. They did not snarl, they did not bark, they simply blocked the path with a precision that made Daniel's pulse rise. He had seen trained units move like that. He had seen tactical teams set positions with less discipline. For a second he could not make himself move. Emily took 3 more steps, then stopped. She turned slowly and looked at him with a strange calm that did not belong on a child her age. "You've seen me before, haven't you?" she asked. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had never spoken to her. He was sure of that. Yet she said it like she knew what he remembered better than he did. Before he could answer, she spoke again, softly, almost kindly, and said his name. Then she mentioned details she should not have known, including his late wife and an old case that had destroyed his career for 2 years. Daniel's face changed before he could hide it, and Emily noticed. The dogs stepped forward with her, 1 step each, still perfectly matched. It was not random movement. It was measured pressure. Daniel scanned the area, looking for cameras, handlers, Anything that could explain how a little girl could know this much and control that much. Then one of the dogs lowered its paw and scratched hard at a crack near the curb. Daniel moved closer and crouched. Buried under dirt and paper was a small tracker device, active and blinking. Someone had planted it there recently. Emily looked at the device, then back at Daniel. "I told you," she said quietly. "You weren't the only one following." In that instant Daniel understood the dogs were not surrounding him to attack. They were forcing him to see that he had stepped into something already in motion. The street felt different after that, not empty, but occupied by danger. Daniel rose slowly, every instinct telling him to retreat, yet something in Emily's expression held him there. She did not look protected by the dogs. She looked hunted with them, still watching. At 7:24 a.m. the sound of tires cut through the silence of Harrison Lane. A black SUV turned the corner too fast and stopped hard near the sidewalk. Two men stepped out before the engine even settled. Their clothes looked expensive, but the way they moved was wrong for men with nothing to hide. One of them raised both hands and called out that the dogs belonged to them. The other smiled at Emily in a way that made Daniel understand this was not a custody dispute or a misunderstanding. This was contact. Daniel moved between the men and the girl, but as soon as he saw the face of the man on the left, recognition hit him. He had seen that face in photos from an unsolved fire investigation a year earlier, a case involving a house on Cedar Avenue and a child officially listed among the dead. Daniel looked at Emily, then back at the men, and the timeline in his head began to crack. "Stay where you are," he warned, but the men kept talking, trying to sound reasonable. They claimed Emily had been taken from them. They said the dogs were valuable and dangerous and needed to be returned. One of them even laughed softly and said Daniel was making a scene over a runaway girl who had been manipulated into hiding. Emily did not flinch. She stood still, one hand resting on Rex's neck, and finally said the words Daniel had not been ready to hear. "I didn't die in that fire," she said. "I was taken out before it spread." The men stopped smiling. Daniel asked her who took her, but before she answered, one of the dogs gave a low warning growl and the others tightened around her. Emily kept her eyes on the men. "They wanted me alive," she said. At first, Daniel felt the weight of every bad assumption made in the old case. The fire had been treated as a tragedy. Emily was telling him it had been an operation. He pressed for details, but the taller man interrupted and told her to stop talking, his voice suddenly stripped of the fake politeness. That change was enough. Daniel knew then these men were not here to argue. They were here to recover something they had lost. Emily lifted her chin and spoke louder. She said the fire was planned, that her room had been locked from the outside, and that someone had waited behind the house near the alley to pull her out before the neighbors arrived. Daniel asked why. Emily's answer came without hesitation. "Because I was never supposed to survive as myself," she said. "I was supposed to disappear." The lane seemed to narrow around them. The blood trail on the road made more sense now. The tracker made more sense. Even the dogs made more sense. They had not formed around her because she was dangerous. They had formed around her because they had learned what happened when no one protected her. The men stepped forward together, and every dog responded at once. Emily did not back away. For the first time that morning, Daniel saw something stronger than fear in her face. He saw memory, and it had finally stopped running. Daniel also saw something else in her expression, something he did not expect from a child facing the men who had destroyed her life. He saw certainty. She had been afraid before. She had been hunted before. But not now. Now she was done hiding, and the dogs beside her seemed to know it. Everything broke at 7:26 a.m. The shorter man reached inside his jacket so fast that Daniel's body reacted before his mind caught up. He expected a gun, maybe a knife, but what came out was a taser. Daniel stepped forward to block the shot, shouting for the men to drop it, but Emily moved first. She slipped out from behind him and placed herself directly between the weapon and the dogs. The crack of electricity split the lane. The wires struck her, and for one terrible second Daniel thought he had just watched a child collapse in front of him. But Emily did not fall. Her body jerked once, sharply, and then she stood there, breathing hard, her face pale but upright. The men froze, Daniel froze, even the dogs froze. The sight made no sense. Emily looked down at the wires against her sweater, then up at the man holding the taser. There was shock in his face now, not because he had hit her, but because she was still standing. One of the dogs let out a furious bark and surged forward. Then another. In less than a second all 7 were about to break formation. Daniel knew if that happened the lane would turn into a bloodbath. But Emily raised one hand and shouted a single word, "No." The command cut through the chaos with startling force. Every dog stopped, not slowly, not reluctantly. Instantly, their muscles stayed tight, their teeth stayed bared. But they held their ground because she had spoken. Daniel stared at her, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The taser should have dropped her. The dogs should have attacked. Neither thing happened. The taller man took a step back and muttered that she was not supposed to be this stable. Daniel heard it clearly. Emily heard it too. Her eyes changed. "You changed the dosage," she said, and the man's silence answered her before his mouth did. Daniel turned to her, asking what he meant. But she looked past him, as if the lane had disappeared and some older room had taken its place. When she spoke again, her voice was flatter, stripped of fear. She said there had been tests after the fire. Needles. Restraints. Bright rooms with no windows. They had pushed current through her body, watched her reactions, recorded what the dogs did when she was hurt, and called it progress. Daniel felt anger rise so fast it made his hands shake. This was no longer just a criminal case. It was torture dressed up as research. Emily's breathing grew uneven, but she kept standing. The dogs pressed closer around her, sensing what those memories were doing to her. Daniel realized then that the men had not only tried to control the dogs. They had tried to turn Emily into part of the same system. That was why the bond felt unnatural to everyone else. It had been forced, measured, engineered. Yet somehow what survived in her was not obedience. It was will. The shorter man lifted the taser again with desperate hands. This time Daniel drew his weapon. "Don't," he said. But before anyone moved, Rex stepped in front of Emily and lowered his head, making it clear that if the next second went wrong, nothing in that lane would stay under human control. Daniel saw it clearly. Emily was not fearless because she felt nothing. She was standing because she had been hurt so many times that fear changed in her. And somehow the dogs had learned to carry that pain with her too. At 7:28 a.m. the balance finally shattered. The taller man moved first, faster than Daniel expected, and this time he did not reach for the taser. He pulled a handgun from the back of his waistband and raised it with the wild, desperate speed of someone who knew control was slipping away. Daniel reacted on instinct. He stepped toward Emily, one hand lifting his weapon, the other reaching back as if he could physically push her behind him. He shouted for the man to drop it, but fear had already outrun reason. The gun fired. The sound slammed through Harrison Lane and echoed off the brick walls, so hard it felt bigger than the street could hold. Daniel saw the muzzle flash. He saw Emily start to turn. He saw Rex launch. The dog moved with a force that looked impossible even after everything Daniel had seen that morning. 1 second Rex was beside Emily, the next he was in front of Daniel, body twisting in midair as the bullet struck him high in the shoulder. He hit the pavement hard. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. The silence after the shot felt worse than the noise. Then Emily dropped to her knees beside Rex with a sound Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. It was not a scream. It was smaller and more broken than that. The sound of someone losing the one thing that had stayed with her through everything. The dogs reacted instantly. All 6 remaining shepherds surged forward at once. Their formation disappeared and became something rawer, faster, more dangerous. Daniel expected chaos and blood, but what happened was stranger. The dogs did not attack like animals out of control. They moved with terrifying precision. One slammed into the gunman's wrist and sent the weapon skidding under a parked car. Another hit the second man low behind the knees and dropped him to the ground. 2 more boxed them in, snarling and snapping inches from their faces, forcing them flat without tearing into them. The last pair circled wider, blocking escape routes and keeping pressure on both men so they could not rise. It was violent, but it was measured. Not one dog went for the throat. Not one ignored Emily's position. They were not trying to kill. They were trying to end the threat. Daniel understood then that these dogs had learned a kind of restraint most humans never did. He called for backup into his radio, voice tight, then dropped beside Emily. Blood was spreading through Rex's fur, darker by the second. Emily pressed both hands against the wound, but her fingers were trembling so hard that Daniel had to guide them. "Stay with me," she whispered to Rex again and again, her face streaked with tears she did not seem to notice. "Stay with me. Stay with me." Daniel tried to focus on procedure, pressure, breathing, distance from the lung, but the look in Rex's eyes cut through every trained thought. The dog was in pain, yes, but he was still watching Emily, as if that mattered more than the bullet. The taller man tried once to rise, and one of the shepherds slammed him back down with a bark so sharp it silenced him. Sirens began to build in the distance. Daniel should have felt relief, but his chest only tightened. Emily looked up at him with a face that seemed suddenly much younger. "Hey, new," she said. Daniel asked what she meant, but she shook her head hard, unable to explain, and bent back over Rex. The lane had changed completely now. Windows had opened above them. Neighbors stared down from fire escapes. Somewhere someone was crying. Daniel kept pressure on the wound and watched the blood soak through his fingers. He had seen men shot before. He had held officers through worse. But this felt different because Rex had chosen it. No order. No command. He had seen the line of danger and stepped into it, because that was where Emily stood. That truth landed heavily on Daniel. These dogs were not her weapons. They were her witnesses, her protectors, maybe the only ones who had ever answered fast enough. Emily leaned close to Rex's ear and said something too quiet for Daniel to hear. Rex's breathing shuddered, but his gaze did not leave her. Around them, the 6 dogs held the men pinned in a living circle of teeth, muscle, and fury, yet still they did not cross the final line. Daniel looked from Rex to the others and understood what Emily had built with them. Not control, trust under pain. Loyalty under fear. And now that trust was bleeding out onto the pavement while the whole street watched. Daniel pressed harder on the wound, hearing the sirens close in, and knew the next minutes would decide far more than whether Rex lived. They would decide whether Emily lost the last piece of family she had left. Around them all. By 7:31 a.m. the sirens were close enough to shake the narrow lane, but for Emily the world had shrunk to Rex's breathing. Each breath was thinner than the last. Daniel kept pressure on the wound while paramedics rushed in with equipment, yet even as trained hands moved around them, Emily did not step back. She stayed kneeling beside Rex, one hand on his neck, the other tangled in the fur near his shoulder, as if letting go would mean losing him sooner. Rex's eyes remained fixed on her. He looked past the strangers, past the flashing lights, past the shouting officers securing the 2 men. He watched only Emily, and she seemed to understand something in that gaze that no one else could read. "You remember?" she whispered. Her voice was quiet, but Daniel heard it. "You remember that night, don't you?" Daniel looked at her sharply. The question sounded less like hope and more like certainty. Emily swallowed hard and kept talking to Rex in the same low tone, not caring who heard now. She said he had pulled at her sleeve through the smoke. She said he had found her before the fire reached the back room. She said, when the window would not open, he had barked until someone outside came toward the alley. Daniel felt the old case opening in his head like a wound. The official file had said the fire spread too fast for a rescue from the rear of the house. Emily was describing a living path out. She looked up at Daniel then, and the grief in her face was matched by something colder. "He got me out," she said. "Not them. Not her. Rex did." Daniel asked who she meant by her, though a part of him already knew. Emily's jaw tightened. For a few seconds she seemed to struggle with whether to say it. Then she did. She said her mother had known what was coming. She said her mother had not been helpless inside that house the way everyone believed. She had been part of it. Daniel almost rejected the words on instinct, because they were too large, too ugly, and because Emily was a child speaking under shock. But then the pieces returned, the strange evidence gaps, the locked bedroom, the delayed emergency call, the unidentified transfer records that had gone nowhere. Emily kept going before he could question her. Her mother had worked with the people who ran the experiments. At first she had believed she was helping with treatment, helping save damaged dogs and children with trauma by building bonds between them. That was what they told her. But once Emily started responding in ways the program wanted, once the dogs began reacting to her fear and pain faster than handlers could, the project changed. It stopped being care and became ownership. Emily said her mother realized too late what kind of people she had trusted. When she tried to pull away, they threatened to take Emily completely. The fire had been the solution. A way to erase records, erase witnesses, erase a child, and move the useful part of the project somewhere no one would ask questions. She chose them first, Emily said, and this time her voice broke. Then she changed her mind. But not before they locked my door. Daniel stared at her. "Your mother helped them." Emily nodded once. "Then she tried to stop them. That's why she's alive. That's why they kept her. She knew too much." The truth hit him in layers. The coma, the secrecy, the hidden transfers. Even the way Emily had described being taken after the fire. Her mother had not died because they needed what she knew. Emily bent close to Rex again, and for one painful second Daniel saw the child beneath all the control. "I waited for her to come back," Emily said. "But Rex came first." Daniel looked at the dog and suddenly understood why Rex mattered in a way none of the other dogs did. He had not just bonded with Emily after the fire. He had crossed that first line with her. He had been the first living thing to reach her when the adults around her failed. A voice behind them made Daniel turn. One of the paramedics was asking for space. Another officer was calling his name. And then from beyond the flashing lights, through the growing crowd and police tape, a woman's voice broke through the lane. It called Emily's name once, trembling, desperate, and familiar enough to drain the color from Emily's face. She turned slowly. At the edge of the scene stood a pale woman supported by two officers, weak on her feet, eyes filled with terror and regret. Emily's mother was alive, conscious, and looking at her daughter like the last lie had finally run out. Daniel felt the whole morning shift again. The truth under the fire was no longer buried, and now it was walking toward them. It reached her at last there. By 8:10 a.m. the scene had moved from the lane to the precinct, but nothing felt contained. Rex had been taken to emergency veterinary care under police escort. The two men from Harrison Lane were in custody, separated and no longer pretending they were anything but frightened. Emily sat in a quiet interview room with a blanket around her shoulders, one of the 6 remaining dogs lying against the door as if guarding her from the outside in. Daniel had given his first statement, spoken to internal command, and answered more questions in 40 minutes than most officers faced in a week. Yet the only thing that mattered to him now was the small evidence bag on the table in front of the tech team. Inside it was the chip recovered from the dead dog found near Maple Street. It had been scanned twice with nothing but corrupted data. Then, without warning, it activated. Every monitor in the room flickered at once. Officers turned. A static-filled image formed, cleared and held. The video showed a concrete room underground, badly lit but unmistakably real. Rows of cages lined the walls. Inside them were dogs of different sizes, some pacing, some still, all wearing collars fitted with the same type of chip. The room was not abandoned. Fresh water bowls, active lights, recently opened crates. Someone had been there within hours. Daniel felt the energy in the room change as everyone understood they were not looking at old evidence. They were looking at a live feed. Then the camera shifted. A small figure stepped into view. The room went silent in a way Daniel had already learned to fear. The girl on the screen looked almost exactly like Emily. Same age, same frame, same pale face. She wore a red coat nearly identical to the one Emily had been wearing that morning, and for one impossible second Daniel thought he was looking at a reflection. But there were differences. The girl on the screen held her shoulders differently. Her expression was harder, controlled in a way that did not read as fear. When she looked into the camera, she did not look confused to be seen. She looked ready. "Emily," she said clearly, as if she knew exactly where the feed had opened. "You came back." Daniel turned toward the interview room door before the sentence had even ended. Emily was already standing. She had heard the voice through the monitor speaker in the hall. Her face had gone still, too still, and Daniel recognized that expression now as the place she went when shock was trying to turn into memory. The girl on the screen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Now the game starts," she said. The feed cut out, no countdown, no demand, no explanation. Just that. Tech officers scrambled to trace the signal. A detective cursed under his breath. Someone asked if the image had been manipulated. But Daniel did not need the experts to tell him what he had just seen. Emily was not unique. She had never been the only child inside whatever system had built this nightmare. He entered the interview room slowly. Emily did not sit. One of the dogs beside the door raised its head and watched him. "Who was that?" Daniel asked. Emily looked at him for a long second before answering. "Alara," she said. Her voice was almost flat, but not from calm, from effort. "She was in the room next to mine." Daniel stayed quiet and let her continue. "Emily said there had been other children at first, brought in at different times, each introduced to damaged dogs under controlled conditions. Most did not last long in the program. Some stopped responding. Some became too frightened to continue. Some were taken away and never came back. Only 2 children kept producing the results the handlers wanted. Emily and Alara. They called us matched subjects," Emily said. They said we were proof the bond could be built. Daniel asked what kind of bond. Emily's eyes lowered. Pain, fear, obedience, memory. Whatever got the dogs to react fastest. Daniel felt sick. She went on. Where Emily soothed the dogs and stayed close when they were hurt, Elora learned something else. She learned that frightened things could be controlled if you became the source they feared most. The handlers rewarded her results. They separated the girls often, then brought them together to compare reactions. Emily said Elora changed over time, not all at once, but enough that by the end she no longer looked at the dogs as living beings. She looked at them as tools. Daniel asked if Elora had been there the night of the fire. Emily nodded. She watched, she said. Then after a pause she added, and she lived. That was the moment Daniel understood the real meaning of the feed. This was not a random taunt from a survivor. It was a message from the other half of the experiment, and it had been sent directly to Emily for a reason. Somewhere underground, with caged dogs and active chips and a face stolen from the same past, another girl had been waiting for this exact reunion. Still waiting now. By 9:00 a.m. the Trace team had narrowed the signal to an older service grid beneath a closed subway section on the edge of Brooklyn. The location was one of those dead zones cities forgot, but networks never did, a place of maintenance corridors, sealed stairwells, and abandoned tunnels that still carried power long after public access ended. Daniel did not like taking Emily anywhere near it, but when he suggested she stay behind, she looked at him with the same hard certainty he had seen in Harrison Lane. If Elora sent the message to me, she said, then I'm the reason she'll stay there long enough for you to find her. He had no good answer to that. A tactical team assembled fast. Medics, animal control support, transit maps, 2 behavior specialists, and a controlled unit prepared to move underground. Emily was fitted with protective gear she barely seemed to notice. 4 of the 6 dogs were cleared to accompany the team, after Daniel argued harder than he should have had to. He knew now those dogs were not a risk factor. They were part of how Emily survived. The entrance they used was hidden behind a locked maintenance gate and a steep metal stairwell that smelled of rust, standing water, and old electricity. Every sound sharpened once they descended. Boots struck metal. Radios whispered. Somewhere below pipes clicked. Emily walked near the middle of the formation, Daniel beside her, the dogs alert but silent. The tunnels widened into a service platform littered with broken signs, old cables, and crates pushed against the wall. Then they heard it. A low chorus of growls, not one dog but many, coming from deeper in the dark. The tactical line tightened. Lights swept the tunnel ahead. What they found first were cages. Dozens of them, some occupied, some open, some bent outward as if something inside had tried very hard to get free. The dogs with Emily reacted immediately. Their posture changed. Not toward aggression, but toward recognition. They knew the smell of this place. Daniel saw it in how carefully they stepped and how often they looked back at Emily, checking her position. Then a voice carried through the tunnel. You brought him, it said. And you brought them. Elora stepped into the light at the far end of the platform. She looked even more like Emily in person than on the screen, but the resemblance only made the differences sharper. Emily held grief in her body. Elora held control. Behind her stood 3 larger dogs fitted with reinforced collars and black harnesses, unlike any Daniel had seen. Their eyes tracked movement with trained coldness. Elora smiled lightly. You always needed witnesses, she said to Emily. I preferred results. Daniel ordered her to stay where she was, but she barely glanced at him. This was not a negotiation in her mind. It was a demonstration. Emily took 1 step forward. Let them go, she said, looking at the caged dogs. Elora tilted her head. You still think this is about saving them? She raised a small handheld device. It's about what they become when they stop waiting for kindness. Daniel recognized the threat at once. Drop it, he said. Elora ignored him and looked only at Emily. Do they still follow your fear? She asked. Emily did not answer. One of the caged dogs whined. Another slammed once against metal. The tension in the platform thickened. Elora spoke again, calm and almost curious, as if they were continuing an old lesson. You comfort them. You let them choose. You call that love. But love takes too long. She lifted the device a little higher. Pain is faster. Daniel had heard enough. He signaled the team to spread, but before the move fully started, Elora pressed a switch. A sharp pulse clicked through the tunnel, too high for Daniel to process at first, but not too high for the dogs. The animals behind Elora snapped to attention. Several caged dogs began thrashing. Emily's 4 dogs stiffened instantly, every muscle locking at once. Daniel turned to her. She had gone pale, not from fear alone, but from memory. The device was not just a controller. It was part of the old conditioning. Alara knew exactly which buried reflexes to hit. Connection is fragile, Alara said. Control survives. The tunnel seemed to hold its breath. Daniel realized the next seconds would not be a simple arrest. They would be a collision between 2 ways of breaking living things, and Emily was standing at the center of both. Alara pressed the button fully, and the platform erupted. The sound itself was not loud to human ears, more a clipped burst than a blast, but the effect on the dogs was immediate. The 3 behind Alara lunged as if released from invisible chains. 2 caged animals began ramming their doors hard enough to rattle the metal frames. Worst of all, Emily's own dogs changed. Daniel saw it happen in their eyes first. Recognition vanished and was replaced by conflict so intense it looked almost painful. One backed away from Emily, whining through clenched teeth. Another spun sharply toward the tactical line, confused and agitated. The third barked once, high and sharp, then dropped low like it was trying to fight an order inside its own body. Alara did not look surprised. She looked vindicated. "See," she called. It never left them. Daniel moved toward Emily just as one of her dogs lunged sideways and struck him in the ribs, knocking him off balance. It was not a full attack, not at first, but it was enough to tell him the conditioning ran deeper than training. Officers raised non-lethal launchers. Daniel shouted for them to hold. If they opened fire into this space, the whole platform would collapse into panic and blood. Alara advanced one slow step, device still in hand, while her dogs spread around her in disciplined arcs. She had built herself an army out of damaged instincts. Emily did not run. She was shaking now, but she stayed where she was, eyes fixed on her own dogs, as if calling them back through something deeper than sound. One of them turned toward her and bared its teeth, then immediately flinched as though the act hurt. Daniel understood then that this was not betrayal. It was terror. The device was dragging them into old pain and forcing them to answer it. "Emily!" he shouted. "Move back." She did not. Her breathing turned uneven, but her voice, when it came, was soft. "They're scared." Another pulse clicked from Alara's device. This time Daniel saw one of Emily's dogs break completely and charge straight at him. He raised an arm too late. The impact knocked him to one knee and sent his flashlight skidding across the floor. The dog stood over him, barking and trembling, trapped between attack and hesitation. Daniel braced for teeth, but they never came. The animal could not finish the motion. It knew him. It feared the signal more. Around them, the platform dissolved into fragments of order. Officers fought to hold lines without firing. One of Alara's dogs slammed into a shield. Another vaulted a crate and forced 2 handlers back. Emily's dogs moved in frantic loops, some circling her, some turning outward, all of them caught in a storm that belonged as much to memory as command. Daniel pushed himself halfway up and saw Emily make the choice no child should ever have to make. He was on the ground. Her dogs were breaking. Alara was closing in. Emily could run to Daniel and pull him clear, or she could stay planted and try to bring the dogs back before the next pulse tore them apart completely. The truth on her face was brutal. She loved them both for different reasons. Daniel saw her look at him once, only once, and he knew she understood the cost of either choice. Then she turned away from safety and stepped toward the dogs. "No more," she said, but not as a command. As a plea. Alara laughed, though there was something strained in it now. "They don't belong to you when they remember," she said. Emily took another step, and one of the dogs snapped near her hand, not quite making contact, the way a panicked body reacts before the mind catches up. Daniel's chest tightened in fear, but Emily still did not retreat. "I remember too," she said. That landed harder than any tactical move. Even Alara's smile thinned. Emily knelt slowly in the middle of the chaos, putting herself lower than the dogs, lowering her eyes, making herself the one vulnerable thing in the room. Daniel realized she was rejecting the entire structure of the conditioning. No dominance. No force. No punishment. Just presence. It was the opposite of everything Alara had been taught to use. Another pulse was coming. Daniel could see Alara's thumb tense over the device. If she fired it again, he did not know whether the dogs would collapse, attack, or turn on Emily for good. He tried to rise, but pain shot through his side and dropped him back down. He could only watch as Emily reached both hands toward the same animals that might destroy her, and chose trust over survival one final time there. The final pulse never landed the way Alara intended. Before she could press the device again, Emily closed her eyes and spoke into the chaos with a steadiness Daniel would never forget. She did not shout, she did not command. She said the dogs' names one by one, slowly, clearly, as if each name was a hand reaching through smoke. The first dog to react was the one standing over Daniel. Its barking cut off mid-breath, its ears twitched, its body shuddered once, and then it backed away from him with a confused whine. Emily kept going, naming each of them, speaking not to the fear inside them but to the place beneath it. Daniel had seen officers regain control of bad scenes through force, volume, and superior numbers. He had never seen anyone do it like this. Emily was not overpowering the conditioning. She was outlasting it. The dogs around her began to slow. One dropped to the floor, shaking. Another crawled toward her and pressed its head against her knee. The caged animals behind them quieted enough for the platform to hear a different sound now, the strain in Alara's breathing. For the first time since Daniel had seen her, Alara looked uncertain. "Do it again," one of the tactical officers shouted, but Daniel raised a hand to stop them. He understood the balance now. Another aggressive move could tip everything back into panic. Emily opened her eyes and looked directly at Alara. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. The words were simple, but they hit the platform harder than accusation would have. Alara's expression twisted. "You think I had a choice?" she snapped. Her voice cracked under the anger. The three dogs beside her shifted, not toward attack this time, but toward instability. They were reading her too. Emily took one step forward. "No," she said. "I think we both lost it a long time ago." Daniel saw Alara flinch as if the sentence had reached somewhere the device never could. Then everything happened at once. One of the overloaded junction boxes above the platform burst with sparks, probably damaged by the repeated signal bursts running through old wiring. A sharp pop became a chain of flashes, and then water from a cracked line began pouring down the tunnel wall. Officers shouted. Someone called for immediate extraction. The floor near the service rail hissed as exposed wiring met standing water. Alara looked up too late. The section behind her started to fail. Metal screamed. One of the cages tipped. A dog inside it slammed against the bars in panic. Daniel pushed himself upright despite the pain and yelled for everyone to move to higher ground. Emily did not retreat. She ran toward Alara. Daniel shouted her name, but she kept going. For one impossible second he thought she meant to attack. Then he saw the truth. The platform edge behind Alara was collapsing, and Emily had chosen to save the only person there who understood her past well enough to destroy herself with it. Alara stared at her like she could not process what was happening. "Why?" she demanded as Emily grabbed her wrist. Emily's answer came through gritted teeth as both girls fought the pull of water and debris. "Because you were there too." Daniel and two officers reached them at the same moment. A steel support dropped where Alara had been standing seconds earlier. The device flew from her hand and shattered in the flooding channel below. Without the signal, the remaining dogs broke fully from their frenzy. Tactical officers moved fast, opening cages, redirecting animals, clearing the platform. Then a second collapse hit, larger than the first. Daniel saw Emily shoved sideways by the force of water and lose her grip. He lunged, caught only the sleeve of her red coat, and for a moment thought he had her. The fabric tore. Emily vanished into the dark water rushing toward the lower tunnel. "Emily." Daniel's voice cracked across the station. Search teams swept the system for hours. Divers entered where they could. Thermal scans were rerouted. Every drain map in the district was pulled. By 1:30 am they found survivors, recovered dogs, and brought Alara out alive in restraints and shock. But Emily was gone. The only thing found near the flood channel was her red coat caught on a bent section of rail. Weeks passed. Statements were taken, charges multiplied. The old program began to come apart in public view. Then one afternoon in a small city park, Daniel saw something that made him stop walking. A little boy sat on a bench crying over an injured stray dog curled at his feet. Beside him sat a girl in a red coat. Her hair was shorter now. Her face looked older somehow. But when she leaned toward the boy and spoke, Daniel knew. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "I'm here." In the distance, 9 dogs stood watching. And in the shadow of the trees, Alara stood too, alive and silent, as if the story had not ended at all. Daniel did not call out. He only watched because he finally understood the truth. Emily had not disappeared. She had moved beyond the place where other people named what she was.